Welcome to the Practice Impossible podcast, where your host, Jude Pierre, MD, also known as Coach JPMD, discusses medical practice topics that will guide you through the maze that is the business of medicine and teach you how to increase profits and help populations live long. Your mission, should you choose to accept, is to listen and be transformed. Now, here's your host, Coach JPMD.
Thank you so much for listening to the Practice Impossible podcast with me, your host, Coach JPMD. And I wanted to thank you and also remind you to leave a feedback if you haven't done so. If you can pause this episode right now and just leave me a review, let me know what you think about the podcast, and let me know what topics you would like to hear from or hear about in the future. It really would help me understand how I can provide even more value to you. So today's episode is a different episode, and it's somewhat of a podcast book review, which I'm not even sure if that's a thing, but I'm making it a thing this time. So as you know, my mission is to help populations live long by increasing physician awareness of spiritual, mental, and physical health globally. And this is something that's been dear to my heart, knowing that physicians struggle, and we all struggle with different stresses, and especially during the COVID times. And one of the things that we can do to help our patients is to really help ourselves first. And how do we do that? Well, we learn. We go to school, we read books, we talk to other people, and I talk about that in episode 1, where there are 7 different areas of our lives that we can improve on to really help ourselves, help our patients even more. And one of the things that over the past couple of years I've been researching and looking into is life expectancy tables around the world. And if you look at life expectancy, you would think the United States actually ranks number 1 or number 5 in the world as far as life expectancy is concerned. And it was to my surprise, probably about 10 years ago, I did the research and looked online. And currently there's a website called the worldometers.info. That's www.worldometers.info. And I'll leave the URL in the show notes. But it pretty much gathers data around the world, from around the world. And the data is similar to the data that's at the World Health Organization. And the United States actually ranks number 46 in the world in terms of life expectancy. So an average person in the United States actually is expected to live 79.11 years. That's pretty bad. So you might wonder, okay, who's living the longest in the world? Well, people who live in Hong Kong, Japan, Macau. I had to look that one up, by the way. Macau is actually a territory in China that was actually owned by the Portuguese at one point. That's a whole other story. So, that's the top 3, and I'll list out the top 10 on this list. Switzerland, number 4, Singapore, number 5, Italy, number 6, Spain, Australia, number 8, Channel Islands in the English Channel, and Iceland. So that's the top 10 countries in the world that have the highest life expectancy, with Hong Kong being number 1, with a life expectancy for both sexes at 85.29. Now, if that doesn't give you some pause, I'm not sure what will, because here we are in the richest country in the world, the most powerful nation in the world, ranking number 46 in life expectancy table. So when I learned that, I actually started to do some research on what are the countries doing that make us different. And I came across the Blue Zone Solutions, or the Blue Zones. And there's a book called The Blue Zone Solutions written by Mr Beuttner that I wanted to kind of highlight, or give you some highlights or the cliff notes of the book. It's a great book. I've been telling patients or suggesting that patients read this book because it gives such insight on what countries or where people live the longest and what they do in those regions. So essentially, it's a research compilation of countries where their people lived to be older than 100, more than the rest of the world. So the highest concentration of centenarians in the world. And what were those countries? Well, Icaria, Greece, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, the Seventh-day Adventist community in Loma Linda, California, which was the only blue zone in the United States, and Nicoya Peninsula. I think it's Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. So those are the 5 blue zones that Dan Beuttner and his colleagues and his researchers found. And what they did was they went to these areas and they detailed what were some of the characteristics of all of those areas that had the centenarians and how common were those characteristics in other areas where they had high levels or high concentration of centenarians. And what they came up with was the Power 9, the 9 things that were common in all of those regions. And I'm just going to list them out. I encourage you to read the book. I actually read the book and then did an audiobook, and now I'm just going back and doing some research just because it's so impactful to what I've been doing over the past couple of years in my life and what I think you can help your patients do to help them live long. The one thing that they found was that people who lived the longest moved naturally, meaning that they didn't go to the gym, they didn't have treadmills, and they didn't have steppers. They just moved naturally. They walked to the markets. They walked up hills. They gardened. So they moved naturally. They had a purpose. That's the second thing that, they didn't live life not knowing what they wanted to do. They all had a purpose that was bigger than what they were doing in their profession. And that, I believe the researchers said that was worth up to 7 years of extra life expectancy. So when you have a purpose, when you have a vision of what you want to do beyond what your work life is, that helps you live long. The third thing was that they downshifted. And downshifting meant different things in different areas. Some people take naps in the afternoon. Some had wine in the afternoon. Some hung out with family or friends. And that's something that I remember doing growing up in Haiti, where, in the afternoons, we took naps sometimes. We call them siestas. I don't know if they have that in Latin American countries, but it's something that was done routinely, particularly on the weekends. But I remember my parents would come home early from work and they would just nap in the afternoons. And that was something that's very common. The fourth thing that they described in the book was the 80%, what they call the 80% rule. And in one area, they developed habit when they were eating to stop eating when they were 80% full. And what that does is it helps their brains catch up to where their stomachs are and helps them not overeat. And that's something I found very interesting because, I eat until I'm really full. But if you eat slower and you let the food kind of digest, you tend to realize that you don't have to eat as much as you do. And there's a saying that they use in the book that the Okinawans use that's harahachubu. Harahachubu means it's a mantra that's said before meals that reminds people to stop when they're 80% full. So that was something I learned. That's pretty interesting. There's plant slant is what they call it. Number 5, where they eat mainly legumes and plant-based diets. So that includes beans, which was very common in all of the regions, as well as soy, lentil. Those were like the cornerstones of the diets. And that's not to say that they didn't eat any meat, but there was definitely a plant slant. Number 6 was that they drank wine. So in all of the blue zones, and even some of the Adventists, they drank 1 to 2 glasses of wine daily. And I think most of the wines that they speak about in the book are red wines, which has the resveratrols, which helps promote good memory and cellular function. So that's interesting. The 7th thing that they talked about was the right tribe. The Okinawas call their tribes the Moais, and that's Moais. And a Moai is basically a group of friends that go through life together, through the ups and the downs. And they're the people that would help their tribe people to eat healthy, to de-stress, to help them, motivate them to walk and exercise. And I shouldn't say exercise, but walk or be active. And that brings me to something I've been kind of trying to help my kids understand. And that is, you are the average of the 5 people that you hang out with. I don't know if I've said this on the podcast before, but if you hang out with 5 people that are obese, eating the wrong foods, not working out, or overeating, over drinking, then you're going to be the average of those people. if you hang out with 5 people that are powerful, have a purpose, are physically active, and are really doing things to help change the world, then you'll be the average of those 5 people. So my recommendation, based on this book and based on what I've experienced, is find 5 people or find 4 people that can encourage you to and push you to do the right thing in your health, in your personal life, your spiritual life, your mental health. Because if you hang out with 5 people that are very depressed, very angry, or very negative, then you're going to be the average of those negative people. So figure out the right tribe, as they say in this book. Community. Community is the 8th thing that they found. And one of the things that they found was that all of the centenarians in those blue zones had a faith-based community that they belonged to. And it didn't matter what religion they were involved in. And this is something we discussed in the episode with Zach Elliott. I think it was episode 6, Religion and Longevity, and how that can help populations live long. And that was shown to add 4 to 14 years of life expectancy in the Blue Zone communities. And lastly, the 9th Power 9 characteristic of the Blue Zone was that they put loved ones first. And I think that's the most important for me. Putting things in order. Successful, and I'm going to quote this in the book because it's that powerful. Successful centenarians in the Blue Zones put their families first. They keep aging parents and grandparents nearby or in the home, which also lowers disease and mortality rates of their children. So that is something that I think, if we look at the Blue Zones and we look at the Power 9, I think, again, another quote from the book was that what we discovered, or what they discovered, was that in every Blue Zone, the path to a long, healthy life comes from creating an environment around yourself, your family, and your community that nudges you into following the right behaviors subtly and relentlessly, just as the Blue Zones do for their populations. Pretty neat stuff. So that was a Power of 9. So what I really found really interesting, and I listed 7 things that I found pretty interesting, was that there are certain foods that we should all be eating. And I'm going to go through each Blue Zone and kind of give you what they found was the top food, the superfood that these centenarians ate that helped them. And in Ikaria, Greece, it was olive oil. In Okinawa, Japan, it was bitter melon. And you can look these fruits up, but I think bitter melon is something that I've never even eaten before. But Okinawans also eat a lot of sweet potato. In Sardinia, Italy, they drink and eat a lot of goat and sheep milk and cheese, which helps lower LDL cholesterol, and it has anti-inflammatory properties as well. In the Adventist community in Loma Linda, California, they eat lots of avocados. In the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, they eat maíz nixtamal. And it's really their version of the tortilla that they eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And one of the things that they do is that they take the corn before they make the flour, and they put the corn in lime and water and then grind the flour. And that supposedly apparently releases some of the nutrients in the corn that increases the body's ability to actually absorb this corn. So that's a pretty interesting thing that they do, and it's not something that is usually done in commercially available tortillas in this country. Obviously, there are other foods that they eat in the Blue Zones, but I can't give you everything in this podcast, so you can find out in the book. The other thing that I learned was that food intake has to be balanced, and that's something that I kind of had to learn the hard way. About 1.5 years, 2 years ago, I actually started my journey towards a plant-based diet, or mostly plant-based diet. And I did add fish to that, or seafood. And what I noticed after about 1.5 years was I was getting severe reflux, and reflux that would actually last all day and kind of worried me. And I called my local gastroenterologist, Dr. Mufta, and he said, "Oh, Jude, just take some Tums and some Prilosec and take it for 6 weeks, and that should help." And I did that for a couple of days, and actually didn't help at all. And I was like, what is going on here? Do I need an upper endoscopy? Do I need a upper GI series? Do I have a stricture in my esophagus causing all kinds of stuff, trouble swallowing with some gas pains. It would actually get better with soda, ginger ale. And I said, I can't keep doing this for the rest of my life. That's impossible. Then my wife was like, maybe it's your diet. Maybe you're lacking something in your diet. And I'm like, ooh, interesting. So I then realized that I was eating a lot of carbs. And although I was calling myself, saying I'm eating a plant-based diet, I was still eating some pastas and lots of rice and no meat, no chicken, no eggs. And I think I was lacking some nutrients. So I shifted, moved to mainly a plant-based diet, but I added eggs to that diet. But I also added some kombucha, which introduced some probiotics in my diet, and actually my reflux improved. So I think eating a balanced diet that has all the nutrients that you need, as it is described in the Blue Zone, where, you can eat beans, but if you eat beans and rice, it actually complements each other and actually decreases the glycemic load of the rice when you couple it with beans. Very interesting stuff. I think we talked about relationships and how longevity is linked to relationships, and I think that was fascinating to read about. And another thing they talked about was, you don't have to say the harabuch. I can't say that word, but the words that the Okinawans say before they eat. And we say grace. Well, at least we try to say grace and before every meal. And I think just being thankful for the meal that you have allows you to pause and reflect on what you're eating, how are you going to eat it, how it's going to nourish your body. And I think that can be linked to longevity as well. Recently, I actually signed up for a gym membership. And I am second guessing that now after reading this book, because it's not about going to the gym and working out. It's about being active and doing things that are going to keep you moving. And one of the things I do is play soccer at least once or twice a week. And that helps kill two birds with one stone, because I'm able to socialize and talk trash with other wannabe soccer players or professional soccer players. And so I think it helps me stay active and keep my brain functioning at a high level. I think I talked about the beans and how they're superfoods, and all the Blue Zones actually consumed a lot of beans. And that's something I did not know. So how can Blue Zones crop up in the U.S.? Well, that's already started. And with the work that the Blue Zone Solutions team is doing, they actually started that in a couple of years ago in one of the communities that they started a project where they introduced some of the things that were being done in the Blue Zones. They introduced them into communities in Minnesota. I think one of the first communities was the Albert Lea community in Minnesota, that helped that community improve their life and improved rates of obesity, and which in turn will decrease rates of diabetes and decrease rates of hypertension, and lead to increase in life expectancy. So I think that's my next project. I think just understanding what we can do in our communities to help our populations live long, because I think it's through the work that we do in our personal lives and our family lives that we can then translate to our professional lives and our lives, the lives of our patients. So I encourage you to read the book, get the book, do the audiobook if you can. I don't get anything from promoting the book, but I just wanted to share this knowledge that I've gained from reading it. And hopefully in the near future, I can have someone from the Blue Zone Solutions Project on the podcast, so I can ask them questions and see where they are in their progress. But I also wanted to share one last thing with you guys, and that is there is a Live Longer Better Vitality Test. And it's a test that was developed in collaboration with the University of Minnesota School of Public Health. And it essentially calculates your life expectancy and how long you'll stay healthy, and sends you some personalized recommendations. Again, I thought this was pretty neat, and maybe I'll share some of my results with you online. But go ahead and take the test. I'll leave the link to the test in the show notes, so that you guys can do some homework and see how your current lifestyle will help you live longer or shorter. So as I said in the beginning, leave a review. Let me know what you think about this episode and any of the other episodes that you've listened to. And if you think this was not too helpful, leave that also so I know not to ever do a book review again. But hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you in 2 weeks with another episode of the Practice Impossible podcast. And we thank you for listening. And please do share this episode with your friends.